You don't feel any different than being 79 so far. Who knows what another year will bring?
What makes a man leave behind everything, comfort, convenience, even safety, to live deep in the wilderness for nearly 50 years? This isn't fiction. It's the real-life story of Tom Oar, a former rodeo cowboy turned mountain man who built a life most only dream about, and then had to walk away from it. But why? And what does his journey reveal about the cost of freedom, aging, and resilience?
We try to make as much money off of everything that we kill.
If you've ever watched the reality television series Mountain Men, you've likely come across the name Tom Oar. He's one of the show's most recognizable faces, and for many, a symbol of a way of life that feels distant, almost forgotten. Unlike many characters often portrayed in modern media, Tom's appeal comes from his simplicity, his honesty, and his deep connection to nature. But long before he appeared on camera, his journey into the wilderness had already been underway for decades. Tom Oar wasn't born into the wild. He came into the world in 1943 in Rockford, Illinois. His early life was shaped by a family history rooted in the traditions of the American West. His father, Chike Oar, had worked in the Wild West shows, performances that romanticized frontier life and showcased the skills of cowboys, trick riders, and sharpshooters. That kind of upbringing had a deep influence on Tom. Being around horses and rodeo culture from a young age naturally pulled him into a life filled with risk, discipline, and the values of self-reliance. In his younger years, Tom made a name for himself as a professional rodeo cowboy, particularly in bronc riding. It's a sport that demands a high level of physical strength and mental toughness, and it leaves little room for error. Injuries are common, and the lifestyle can wear people down long before they reach middle age. Tom was good at it, so good that he gained respect across the country for his grit and ability to handle wild horses. But rodeo life has a shelf life. By the time he was in his 30s, Tom understood that his body wouldn't be able to keep up with the sport forever. He needed a different path. That path led him, along with his wife Nancy, into one of the most remote regions of the continental United States, the Yaak Valley in northwestern Montana. They made the move in the 1970s, when very few people outside the region had even heard of the place. The Yaak is isolated, densely forested, and cut off from the kind of infrastructure most people take for granted. For Tom and Nancy, though, it wasn't a retreat from the world. It was a move towards something they believed in, a life of simplicity, of doing things by hand, and of building something meaningful from the ground up. They didn't just buy a house and settle in, they built their own home piece by piece, with no access to electricity or running water. Winters in the Yaak can be long and brutal, with temperatures dropping far below freezing for months at a time. It's not the kind of place where you can casually ride out a storm. Every decision, every chore, every meal needs planning and preparation. And yet, that's exactly what drew the Oars in. They wanted a life where they could rely on themselves, where their success or survival depended on their own effort and knowledge. One of the most significant skills Tom picked up during this time was traditional hide tanning. It's a process that turns animal hides into usable leather, and it's a skill with a long history but few modern practitioners. Through trial and error, and with a deep respect for the animals and the land, Tom became one of the country's most respected buckskin tanners. He didn't use chemicals or factory equipment, just time-honored methods that take patience and care. Over time, his leatherwork earned him recognition far beyond the borders of the Yaak. People came to know Tom not just as a mountain man, but as an artist and craftsman. Life in the wilderness also shaped the relationship between Tom and Nancy. Their partnership wasn't just about affection or companionship. It was about teamwork. Every day required cooperation. Whether it was hauling water, gathering firewood, or preparing for winter, each of them had a role to play. They faced the elements together and built a life not just for themselves, but for the values they held dear. In a world where convenience often takes priority, their lifestyle served as a quiet rebellion. They proved that it's possible to live differently, to find satisfaction in work and connection in isolation. Their story remained mostly private for many years. While friends and neighbors in Montana might have known about their way of life, It wasn't until producers from the History Channel's Mountain Men reached out in the early 2000s and 10s that Tom's world began to open up to the rest of the country. The show was created to document the lives of individuals and families who lived off the grid, away from modern civilization. When they met Tom, they knew they had found someone special. From the first episodes, it was clear that Tom wasn't putting on a performance. He wasn't trying to be dramatic or larger than life. He was simply going about his day, chopping wood, making clothing, feeding animals, and getting ready for the snow. That authenticity resonated with viewers. While the show included other personalities, Tom quickly became a fan favorite. His calm nature, steady work ethic, and obvious love for his wife and animals stood out in a world of fast edits and loud personalities. It's important to note that Tom never seemed interested in becoming a celebrity. In interviews and appearances, he came across as modest, even a little surprised by the attention. He often said he was just living the way he always had. That kind of humility is rare, and it only made audiences appreciate him more. He became more than a character on television. He became a kind of modern folk hero, someone who made people think about the kind of life they were living and the kind they might wish they could. As the show progressed, more of Tom's past came to light. His rodeo background, his craftsmanship, and his decision to live remotely weren't just interesting anecdotes. They became central to how people understood his character. He wasn't escaping from society out of fear or anger. He was moving towards something more fulfilling, more honest. And in doing so, he created a life that many people admired, even if they couldn't imagine living it themselves. It's easy to romanticize this kind of lifestyle. The snow-covered log cabins, the handmade tools, the silence of the forest, all of it seems peaceful, even idyllic, especially when viewed through the lens of a camera. But Tom's story is a reminder that this way of life isn't easy. It requires strength, endurance, and a willingness to accept discomfort as part of daily life. There are no shortcuts. What you eat, what you wear, and how you stay warm all depend on your own effort. And that's exactly what Tom embraced. Tom Oar's life changed significantly when television came into the picture. By the time he was approached by the producers of Mountain Men in the early 2000s, he and Nancy had already been living in the Yaak Valley for decades. They weren't looking for attention and certainly not for fame. They had built a quiet life based on self-reliance, daily work, and a deep connection to the land. But when the show's creators learned about Tom's story, his background, his skills, and his way of living, it was clear he fit exactly what they were looking for. Tom represented something that had almost disappeared from modern life. A person living in harmony with nature, not out of necessity, but out of choice. From the moment Tom appeared on screen, he struck a chord with viewers. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't chase camera time or try to stand out. Instead, he just kept doing what he'd always done. Whether he was tanning hides, cutting firewood, or preparing for winter, everything about his lifestyle reflected simplicity and purpose. Unlike many reality shows that rely on conflict or high energy to hold attention, Mountain Men offered something quieter, and Tom embodied that tone perfectly. He became one of the show's most beloved figures, not because he tried to be entertaining, but because his life had genuine meaning. As the series continued, audiences got to see more of Tom's world. They saw the detailed work that went into his handmade leather goods, the way he treated animals with care, and the quiet but powerful bond he shared with Nancy. Many viewers admired not just his survival skills, but his attitude, calm, practical, and full of quiet wisdom. He wasn't living off the grid to impress anyone. He was doing it because it brought him closer to what mattered most. That authenticity earned him a loyal following, and for many people, he became the heart of the show. But over time, even the strongest individuals faced the limits of age and health. Tom, who had spent years living in harsh conditions, began experiencing the effects of his lifestyle. Around 2022, he started having heart-related symptoms. He noticed shortness of breath, fatigue, and some chest discomfort. At first, he brushed off the signs, something many people who are used to physical work tend to do. But the symptoms didn't go away. Eventually, he saw a doctor and learned that his heart wasn't functioning properly. Fluid was starting to build up in his lungs, and it was clear that something more serious was going on. Tom was hospitalized and placed on medication. He also had to wear a heart monitor to keep track of his condition. For someone like him, who had always depended on physical strength and personal independence, these changes were difficult. He wasn't used to relying on machines or doctors. But Tom was also realistic. He accepted the situation and began making adjustments. Still, it was a turning point. He started to realize that his time in the remote wilderness might be coming to an end. Not because he wanted it to, but because his body was telling him it was time. By October 2024, Tom's health took another serious turn. He was hospitalized again, this time with more complications. The rugged mountain lifestyle that he had once thrived in was now too demanding for his condition. Long winters, heavy labor, and isolation from medical services became real risks. After discussing their options, Tom and Nancy made a difficult decision. They would leave their home in the Yacht and move closer to their son Chad, who lived in Florida. The move actually happened in 2020 as a precaution, but it became even more important in light of Tom's health issues. Leaving the Yacht wasn't a simple relocation, it was in many ways the end of an era. The cabin they had built, the land they had worked, and the life they had shaped together over decades, all of it represented a deep and personal commitment. Their homestead wasn't just a place to live, it was a part of who they were. Letting go of that life meant facing not just physical change, but emotional loss as well. For Tom and Nancy, moving to Florida meant giving up the daily rhythm of the wilderness. But it also meant staying alive, staying close to family, and gaining access to medical care when needed. While Tom rarely speaks at length about his personal life, there are moments when his story reflects even deeper layers of hardship. In 2015, Tom and Nancy lost their daughter, Chike Oar. She passed away in St. Petersburg, Florida. The cause of her death was not publicly shared, and Tom has never gone into detail about it. That decision reflects the couple's approach to grief and privacy. They don't speak often about painful events, but that doesn't mean those events haven't left a mark. In fact, the silence around Chike's passing only highlights how profound the loss must have been. The death of a child is among the most difficult experiences any parent can face. It reverses the natural order of life and creates a kind of grief that doesn't go away. For someone like Tom, who has always found strength in action, working with his hands, preparing for the seasons, focusing on the tasks of survival, grief may have taken a quieter shape. It likely appeared in pauses between work, in early morning moments of stillness, or in long walks through the woods where memory lives just beneath the surface. Tom never needed to speak openly about his pain for people to understand that it existed. The wilderness in some ways provided a space for healing. Nature doesn't offer easy comfort, but it does offer continuity. The days move forward, the seasons change, and there is always work to be done. For Tom, returning to those tasks may have been a way to manage the pain. Tanning leather, chopping wood, building tools, each of these things became a small act of resilience. They weren't about forgetting. They were about continuing. And in that choice to carry on, even in the face of heartbreak, Tom showed the same strength that had carried him through freezing winters and isolation. Even after moving to Florida, Tom didn't completely walk away from his old life. He still works with leather and keeps some of his routines, though the scale has changed. Living closer to his son and receiving regular medical care has become a priority. But his identity as a mountain man hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's become clearer. People who meet him or follow his story continue to see a person shaped by the wilderness, even if he now lives among palm trees instead of pines. Fans of mountain men noticed the shift in Tom's circumstances. Over the years, they watched him age. They saw the gradual slowing of his movements and the signs of wear on his body. But they also saw the strength that remained. They watched as he faced change, not with resistance, but with acceptance. He didn't try to hold on to the past in a desperate way. Instead, he found new ways to adapt, to remain connected to the values that had defined his life. His decision to move was not about giving up. It was about adjusting to the reality of aging. As people grow older, priorities change. Safety, family, and health start to carry more weight. For Tom and Nancy, staying in the Yacht could have meant danger or isolation during a medical emergency. Moving to Florida meant staying close to their son, accessing doctors more easily, and reducing physical strain. It also meant finding a different kind of peace, one that comes not from solitude in the forest but from time with loved ones and the security of support. Tom's story during these years is one of quiet transition, from wilderness to suburbia, from physical strength to medical support, from public figure to private man. And through all of that, he remained true to himself. He didn't trade his identity for comfort. He adapted with care, with thought, and with the same humble approach that earned him so much respect to begin with. The decision to move away from the wild, to step back from the lifestyle that had defined so much of who Tom was, didn't come suddenly. It was a slow, thoughtful process. For someone like Tom, who had spent nearly half a century living off-grid in one of the most remote corners of the continental United States, the idea of returning to anything resembling modern life wasn't easy. In fact, it probably felt like the opposite of everything he had worked for. But life, especially in old age, has a way of presenting new challenges that can't be ignored. One of the biggest turning points was health. After experiencing heart issues and being hospitalized more than once, it became increasingly clear that living hours away from the nearest medical facility was no longer safe. The rugged lifestyle that had served Tom so well for decades had begun to take a toll on his body. Daily chores that used to be manageable, cutting firewood, hauling water, fixing fences, started to require more energy than he could comfortably give. Winter storms that were once just another part of the season now posed serious risks, especially if a medical emergency arose. At the same time, there were other practical considerations. Getting supplies, for example, was never easy in the Yaak Valley. In good weather, the nearest town might still be a long drive over winding roads. In winter, those same roads could become impassable. The isolation that once felt like freedom began to look more like vulnerability. It wasn't just about physical limitations. It was about survival, about protecting what time Tom and Nancy had left together and making the most of it. Family also played an important role in the decision to move. Tom and Nancy's son, Chad, had long expressed concern over his parents living so far away. As they entered their 70s and then their 80s, those concerns became more urgent. Like many adult children of aging parents, Chad wanted to be closer, so he could help if needed, so they wouldn't be alone in an emergency, and so they could simply spend more time together. This wasn't about taking away their independence. It was about making sure they could continue to live comfortably and safely without the risks that come from being hours away from help. In 2020, Tom and Nancy finally made the move to Florida, where Chad lives. It was a significant change. Gone were the long winters and the silence of the woods, replaced by warmer weather, paved roads, and easy access to hospitals, shops, and other modern services. For many people, the move might not seem dramatic. But for Tom and Nancy, it was nothing short of life-altering. Their home in the Yaak wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of their beliefs, their shared experiences, and their commitment to a different way of living. Leaving that home behind was emotional. Every log in the cabin, every worn tool, every hand-stitched piece of leather carried a story. Their homestead had been a place where they built a life together through effort, creativity, and perseverance. Walking away from that wasn't a decision they took lightly, but they did it because they had to. Because the reality of aging, of illness, and of changing circumstances demanded a different approach. Despite the move, Tom didn't abandon his values. Even in Florida, he continues to work with his hands, tanning leather and making traditional goods. While he no longer depends on these crafts for survival, they remain an important part of who he is. Craftsmanship for Tom has never been about making money or impressing others. It's about tradition, discipline, and connection. These skills are a direct link to the life he led for so many years, and in continuing to practice them, he keeps a part of that life alive. His transition from the wilderness to a more conventional setting also didn't mean giving up his identity. If anything, it made his story even more relatable. Everyone at some point faces change, whether it's due to health, age, family, or something else entirely. What Tom showed through his own journey is that change doesn't have to mean compromise. You can adapt without losing yourself. You can honor the past while still embracing the present. Fans of mountain men have watched this transition over the years. They've seen Tom gradually take on fewer physical tasks, spend more time talking than chopping, and eventually step back from the spotlight altogether. For many viewers, watching this evolution has been emotional. Tom wasn't just a character on a show. He was someone people felt they knew, someone who reminded them of values they either once held or wished they could live by. His move to Florida didn't diminish that. If anything, it made him even more real. The idea of stepping away from the life you love is difficult for anyone. But for someone like Tom, who had built every part of that life with his own two hands, it carried even more weight. Still, he approached it the same way he approached everything else, with calm, with honesty, and with a quiet acceptance of what needed to be done. He didn't complain or resist. He adjusted. And in doing so, he continued to set an example for others. This change also reflected a broader truth about aging that isn't often discussed openly. Many people are told to age gracefully, but few are shown what that actually looks like. Tom offered a version of that idea rooted in reality, not in denial, but in adaptation. He didn't try to live in the past. He took the lessons and skills from his past and carried them into the future. That's not just graceful, it's practical, it's wise. Even in Florida, surrounded by palm trees instead of pine forests, Tom remains connected to the wilderness in spirit. His lifestyle may be different, but the principles remain the same. Do what you can with what you have, rely on your own effort, and stay true to who you are. These values are not tied to a place. They're part of a mindset, a way of being in the world that doesn't disappear just because your surroundings change. For those who admired Tom for his independence and resilience, his ability to adapt only deepens that respect. It reminds people that there's no shame in accepting help, no weakness in choosing safety. Aging isn't about losing strength. It's about using the strength you have in ways that serve you best. In moving closer to family, Tom didn't give up on his way of life. He ensured that it could continue in a new form, one better suited to the chapter he's now living. Tom Oar's story during this phase of his life is not just about leaving the mountains. It's about what it means to evolve while holding on to your core values. It's about listening to your body, your family, and your own inner voice. It's about knowing when to push through and when to make a change. And it's about showing that the strength to adapt can be just as important as the strength to endure. One of the most demanding aspects of wilderness living is the weather. Montana winters are harsh, long, and unforgiving. Snow can begin falling in October and last well into May. Temperatures often drop far below freezing for extended periods, sometimes hitting levels that can be dangerous if you're not prepared. For Tom and Nancy, preparation wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Every year, months before the first snow, they had to gather firewood, repair any structural damage to their home, and make sure their food supply was secure. There was no room for procrastination. Missing a step could mean facing real consequences, from frozen pipes to an empty pantry when the nearest store was hours away. The amount of physical labor involved in maintaining their lifestyle was immense. Tasks that many people wouldn't think twice about, like heating their home or getting water, took time, planning, and strength. Firewood had to be chopped and stacked not just once, but again and again throughout the season. Water had to be carried by hand in large containers, often through snow or icy terrain. There was no central heating, no thermostat to adjust, and no convenience store down the road if they forgot something. Healthcare was another major concern. Living far from the nearest town meant that medical help was not readily available. If Tom or Nancy were injured or fell ill, it could take hours or even days to reach a doctor, depending on the weather and road conditions. That meant they had to rely on their own knowledge and instincts to treat minor injuries and manage symptoms. As they got older, this became more complicated. A small injury that might be easily treated in the city could turn into something serious if not dealt with quickly. There was always a risk that help would arrive too late, especially during winter storms or periods of heavy snowfall. Despite these dangers, Tom and Nancy continued with their chosen way of life for many years. They developed routines and skills that helped them survive and even thrive. One of Tom's most valuable contributions was his expertise in traditional tanning methods. Using techniques passed down through generations, he was able to turn animal hides into high-quality buckskin. This wasn't just a survival skill. It became a form of craftsmanship and a modest source of income. His work was known for its authenticity and attention to detail, and it gained recognition well beyond their local community. Still, the process of tanning hides is far from easy. It's labor-intensive, requires specific conditions, and takes both time and patience. First, the hides must be cleaned and scraped, then soaked and stretched. Each step must be done by hand, and there's no guarantee of success. A mistake at any stage could ruin the entire piece. But Tom was dedicated, and over the years, he became one of the most respected traditional tanners in the country. The leather items he created, like coats, moccasins, and bags, were not only functional but beautiful in their own right. Nancy played an equally important role in their survival. While Tom often received public attention for his skills, Nancy worked just as hard behind the scenes. She helped manage the household, prepare food, preserve meat, and assist with many of the daily chores that kept their home running smoothly. Gardening was especially important, despite the short growing season in the region. Together, they grew vegetables, canned fruit, and hunted game. With no access to a supermarket for spontaneous purchases, everything had to be planned well in advance. Food preservation was another essential task. In a place where electricity was limited or non-existent, refrigeration wasn't an option. That meant learning how to store food safely using traditional methods, like smoking meat, drying herbs, and root celery. If they ran out of food or miscalculated their needs, there was no easy fix. Survival depended on preparation, and every year brought a new set of variables: early frosts, heavy snow, unpredictable wildlife that could affect their efforts. While financial independence is often associated with wilderness living, the reality is a bit more complicated. Living off the grid doesn't mean living without expenses. The Oars still needed money to buy supplies, tools, and other essentials they couldn't produce themselves. Selling handmade leather goods helped, but that market is small and inconsistent. It can be hard to predict how much income will come in from year to year. The television series Mountain Men brought them some financial relief and recognition, but it also added a layer of public exposure that sometimes clashed with their naturally private lifestyle. Social isolation was another factor. While the wilderness offers peace and solitude, it also means being far from friends, extended family, and community resources. Special occasions, emergencies, and even simple conversation with others could be hard to come by. For many people, this kind of isolation would be unbearable. But for Tom and Nancy, it was just part of the life they had chosen. Their strong partnership made a huge difference. They relied on each other not only for survival but for emotional support. In many ways, their relationship was the backbone of their ability to endure so many years in such a remote and demanding environment. As the years passed and they continued to age, the physical demands of their lifestyle only grew more intense. Carrying wood became harder, hunting trips became riskier, and the effort required to simply get through a day increased. Their bodies, once used to the daily grind, began to show signs of wear. But they pushed on, year after year, because it was the life they loved. It gave them purpose and a deep sense of connection to the land, to each other, and to something bigger than themselves. People who watch mountain men often admire the Oars for their toughness and determination. But admiration doesn't always equal understanding. Living in the wilderness is not a vacation. It's not a break from reality, it's a reality all its own, with rules and expectations that don't leave much room for error. It takes discipline, patience, and an acceptance that life will be harder than it would be elsewhere. But for Tom and Nancy, that was the point. They didn't want it easy. They wanted something meaningful. The challenges they faced, weather, isolation, physical labor, limited healthcare, and uncertain income, would be overwhelming for most people. But for them, these were just parts of a bigger picture. Each hardship was met with a mindset of problem-solving and resilience. They didn't panic when things went wrong. They adapted, they learned, and they moved forward. Living in the wilderness isn't for everyone. It requires a level of dedication and a set of skills that most people in modern society don't possess. But Tom and Nancy's story shows that even with all its struggles, this kind of life can be deeply rewarding. Their daily routine wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And in a world that often values convenience over effort, their example is both rare and powerful. Tom Oar never set out to be a public figure. He didn't seek attention, and he wasn't trying to make a statement. He was just living in the way that made sense to him. But it's exactly that quiet authenticity that drew people in. Watching Tom work with his hands, care for animals, and prepare for winter wasn't just entertainment. It was a kind of reminder. It made people reflect on their own lives and ask questions they may not have considered before. What does it mean to live well? What are we actually working for? And are we connected to the things that really matter? One of the most powerful aspects of Tom's story is that it doesn't feel staged or manufactured. Reality television often walks a fine line between truth and storytelling, but Tom's presence on Mountain Men always felt genuine. He wasn't putting on a performance. His calm voice, steady movements, and humble attitude made it clear that he wasn't acting. He was just being himself. And that honesty gave viewers something real to connect with, something that felt grounded in a world that often feels chaotic and superficial. There's also something deeply human about Tom's consistency. Year after year, episode after episode, he remained largely unchanged. He stuck to his routines, showed the same respect for nature, and treated those around him with quiet kindness. That kind of steadiness is rare, especially in a media landscape built around quick changes and constant novelty. But for many fans, Tom's predictability wasn't boring. It was comforting. It was a reminder that stability and routine, when done with purpose, can be incredibly fulfilling. Over time, Tom's lifestyle started to take on a symbolic quality. He came to represent not just wilderness living, but a set of values that people increasingly miss in modern life. Things like self-reliance, hard work, humility, and respect for the environment. He didn't talk about these values much. He didn't preach or try to persuade anyone. But his actions spoke clearly. In a world full of noise, his quiet way of living stood out. This is part of what made Mountain Men such a unique show. It wasn't just about survival or rustic living. It was about people who had made a conscious decision to step away from modern conveniences and live differently. Each cast member had their own reasons, but Tom's journey resonated on a deeper level. His transition from rodeo cowboy to mountain man, and later his move away from the wilderness due to age and health, told a story of evolution rather than escape. It was a story about adapting, aging, and staying true to oneself, even as life changes. Of course, the show itself received mixed feedback over the years. While many viewers praised its authenticity and educational value, others questioned how real certain scenes were, or whether the danger was exaggerated for dramatic effect. Some felt that the editing added unnecessary suspense, or that certain elements were repeated too often. But despite these critiques, the core of the show, especially Tom's segments, remained strong. The emotional connection that viewers developed with Tom wasn't about drama. It was about trust. People believed in him, and they saw in him a version of life that felt honest. The impact of the show and Tom's presence in it extended beyond television. For some people, watching Mountain Men inspired lifestyle changes. They started gardens, picked up new skills like woodworking or canning, or began spending more time outdoors. Others simply began to value quiet moments more. Even if they never planned to live off-grid, they found value in slowing down, simplifying their routines, and reconnecting with nature. Tom's influence was never about telling people what to do. It was about showing what was possible. Another reason Tom stood out is that he never seemed interested in the spotlight. He didn't chase social media fame or try to turn his image into a brand. In an era where so many people are constantly promoting themselves, Tom remained focused on his life and his work. He didn't seek validation through followers or likes. His satisfaction came from the tangible results of a day's labor, the warmth of a fire he built himself, the quality of a coat he tanned by hand, or the comfort of knowing he had everything he needed to get through the winter. Tom's partnership with Nancy was also a central part of his story, even if it was shown in quiet moments rather than dramatic scenes. Their relationship was based on cooperation, shared purpose, and deep mutual respect. Together, they weathered harsh winters, dealt with financial uncertainty, and faced personal losses. Their connection added emotional depth to the series, reminding viewers that wilderness living isn't just about surviving alone. It's about building something together, step by step, over time. As Tom aged and eventually moved away from the Yaak Valley, fans followed his journey with a mix of sadness and admiration. It wasn't easy to watch someone so closely tied to the wilderness step away from it. But the way Tom handled that transition, accepting change, prioritizing his health and family, and continuing to live with intention, was another lesson in resilience. He showed that strength isn't just about physical ability. It's about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Now in his 80s, Tom lives a quieter life, away from the harsh winters and demanding routines of the Montana wilderness. But in many ways, he's still the same person. He still values hard work, still keeps his hands busy, and still lives in a way that reflects the choices he's made over a lifetime. His legacy isn't just in the leather goods he crafted or the episodes of television he appeared in. It's in the lives he touched, the inspiration he offered, and the conversations he started. People often wonder what makes a life meaningful. For Tom Oar, the answer seems clear. It's not about wealth or recognition. It's not about following trends or seeking approval. It's about living in alignment with your values, caring for those around you, and finding satisfaction in the small, steady rhythm of daily life. Whether chopping wood, tanning hides, or simply sitting by a fire, Tom did everything with purpose. And that, more than anything, is what people responded to. His story doesn't offer easy answers or quick solutions. It's not a guide to escaping modern life or a manual for off-grid living. Instead, it's an example of what can happen when someone chooses a path and follows it with consistency, integrity, and heart. It reminds us that there are many ways to live a good life, and that sometimes the quietest paths can be the most powerful. As the world grows louder and more complicated, stories like Tom's become more valuable. They remind us to pay attention to what really matters, to reconnect with the natural world, to value our relationships, to slow down, and to remember that a simple life, lived with intention, humility, and care, can be deeply meaningful. Whether or not someone chooses to follow in Tom's footsteps, the lessons from his life remain. It's not about living in the mountains, it's about living in a way that reflects who you are. And for millions of people, Tom Oar has become a quiet guide, showing, not telling, what that kind of life can look like.